You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast, hosted by Zach Bechtold and Matt Franks. If you'd like to learn more about the Bearded Theologians, you can go online at beardedtheologians.com, where we have past podcasts, blogs, and a couple items for sale. So check us out, beardedtheologians.com. Thank you for listening, and enjoy this week's show. You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast, hosted by Matt Franks
and Zach Bechtold.
So this week on the podcast, as we were kicking around trying to figure out what we were going to do, we were looking at the lectionary and discovered it was one of those stories that everybody thinks they know. Because not everybody actually reads their Bible and knows the story pretty well.
What do you mean not everybody reads their Bible?
Not everybody reads their Bible. Have you not seen this Barna statistics? I mean,
statistics are...
I know, but... either way, the Good Samaritan Story is found in Luke chapter 10, really verses 25 through 37. And so, Zach, as you look over that text, what are some things that kind of pop out to you this week?
Well, you're right. This is a story. This is one that we teach in, it's a good Sunday school story. It's a good VBS story. It's one of those that we come through or come to often. But I think what we do in those areas and why people maybe don't know the story, miss details, or those kinds of things is Jesus tells this parable in response to a question from a lawyer, somebody like that stands up and says, "Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus answers his question, "What do I need to do to get this?" with another question, because that's what Jesus does often, and says, "Well, what is written in the law?" This guy's a lawyer. He knows law. He keeps the law. He knows this, and he's trying to trip Jesus up. And what do I need for eternal life? Well, what does the law say? It says to love your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your strength, and all your mind. Everything you have. And he continues through that, and it's just building on what Jesus does, right? And so the lawyer guy, doesn't get it, and so in another very Jesus way, Jesus tells us the story of the Good Samaritan, which is poignant when you think about it. The Jews weren't big fans of Samaritans. They didn't associate with them. They didn't talk to them. They didn't want to. If they were traveling from, Jerusalem to Galilee, they'd go around Samaria just to avoid them. They went out of their way to not be friends with these people. And yet Jesus talks about Samaritans in this parable in a good way. You've got a guy that's traveling. He's beat up, left for dead on the side of the road, and you have a priest and another person who pass him on. The priest passes on because he doesn't want to have to go through the cleansing rituals, right? Because he's on his way to the temple, in theory, and so he doesn't want to stop and help, because then he'd have to go and re-clean himself. And then you get to the Samaritan, and in the eyes of the Jewish people, the really bad one, right? The one that they wouldn't stop to help, and yet he stops, helps, carries them into town, pays for them to stay in a hotel to be healed, those kinds of things. And it's simply, Jesus tells the story to come back and ask the question of who did the right thing here, and makes this guy say, the Samaritan, the one that helped, very begrudgingly, right? And it's interesting that Jesus comes into this with questions. Jesus never really gives them the answer, does in the sense of here's what it is, right? He makes them answer for himself. He knows the answer. And so this guy coming in trying to get Jesus to not be consistent, to answer not according to the law, Jesus just kind of really casually puts it right back on this guy to give the answer.
Well, which is a good way to teach. I mean, that's a good way a teacher teaches. It's not necessarily giving the answer. It's showing them, making him understand what the answer is.
Right.
And I think so I was reading through the Wesley Study Bible, because that's what every good Methodist, should attempt to do. But in the little notes for this section, it says that Wesley captured the essence of the story well, and says, let us renounce that bigotry and party zeal which would contract our hearts into insensibility for all human race, but a small number of those sentiments and practices are so much our own that our love to them is but self-love reflected. With an honest openness of mind, let us always remember the kindred between man and cultivate that happy instinct whereby, in the original constitution of our nature, God has strongly bound us to each other. That's kind of interesting when you think about it, that this story is asking us, how do we show love?
Right.
And flipping the script on us. Instead of saying love is a checklist, it's saying love is an action. And what we do by that shows how we feel about God and our neighbor. And while the story is literally a parable, a story to convey meaning, Jesus is really helping the person see that their actions matter more than just coming up with a definition of what love can look like.
Right.
And they start with a definition, but they make it into the practical, which that if you're really doing something for that kind of sense, that's where it really goes, is that it's more about how are we making this practical. Like, theory is great. Theory can move us places, but until we actually take action, the theory is just the things on paper. And when we think about love, and in this case, it's it's definitely a different time and place. But when we think about love, it's more than just putting it on a t-shirt or a bumper sticker or saying it on our social media deal. It's actually going and doing it, and that physical action of showing love makes a world of difference than saying what love looks like.
Right. Well, and the big central question here is Jesus is asking, or Jesus saying, love your neighbor, right? And the guy asks, who's my neighbor? And Jesus tells the story. In the study Bible I'm using is the New Interpreters, and it talks about this parable starts with a certain man stripped of his identity, and that it is purposely ambiguous concerning the status of this person as either friend or foe, and is simply a human being in need. And how often do we see this? We have people in culture today who are labeled as Good Samaritans, right? They stopped and they helped. They didn't ask any questions. They just helped them. We see it in when there's tragedy, when there's hurricanes and tornadoes and fires and things like that. People aren't going around asking political affiliations. They're not looking at skin color. They're not looking at religious beliefs or anything. They're simply just helping. They're going to help. You see it. Hurricanes are the big ones, I guess, that we see it. In Houston last year, people were coming from Louisiana with their boats and, all over, and just simply helping people in are labeled Good Samaritans, right? And this story is to teach us, it's not so much when tragedy strikes. Yeah, we need these things, but it's in the everyday. We see people who are stripped of their identity and beaten and broken and hurt every day. Why can't we set that aside and be a neighbor? Why can't we set that aside and love as God has called us to each and every day? And yet it seems like more and more we're building up these barriers, going, well, they're this or that, or they believe this or that, or I don't know if I can help that person, right?
Yeah. Well, you remember, hopefully you remember, because it eats at me every time I think about this question. Remember that sermon at World Methodist, what does your love look like?
Yeah, gosh, yeah.
And
I listened to it the other day.
I think one of the things I'll say that I have a struggle with Christians is that they're really good at putting love on paper.
Yeah.
And that's, I'm not picking on any particular denomination or any group of Christians. We do a really good job of talking about what we think love looks like. But the practice of it, the praxis of it is where we struggle. And I think that's part of our problem today. It's, and if you're one of those people that need the biblical truth of love, then it's on paper, but Jesus calls us out. It's not something that we just and that's what I think, that's really what Jesus is getting here. When he uses that line in the very end, when Jesus tells him, go and do likewise.
Yep.
And we have moved away from the going and doing to just picking. And I think we pick and choose very well.
Yeah.
The going and doing and coming across those, the man on the side of the road, because we don't know what the man really is. We just know that the person that helped him was an outsider.
Right.
Which is even a whole other perspective. And so what we have to realize is that God's going to put people in your path along the way to maybe open your eyes to a bigger picture. And that how your response to that matters. And I really think that, like, if you look at this, and that's what the parable is really teaching about, is not about, obviously the lawyer got the theory right, but he's teaching more on the praxis side and saying, all right, so here's how this really works. It's like when your math teacher, in junior high and elementary school, and they're like, math is important and here's why you use it. And you don't pay attention to the reason why they say it's important. But then, like, you're in the real world and you're like, oh yeah, math actually is a thing. And you need to know a little bit of algebra to do projects. And, that stuff's important.
Right. Yeah. It's knowing it's not good enough. It's knowing and doing. Right.
Yeah. And so
good.
I think the good question this week is, how are you going and doing likewise? If you say you believe in God's love and God's mercy, and you say that, how are you putting that into practice? How does your life show that you're, what love looks like? Or just be even challenged to love more, and be open to those possibilities along the road.
There you go.
So, good all-star break for this week, and encourage you to go on the Bearded Theologians website, beardedtheologians.com. We've got some really great content up, and go back and listen to some of our old episodes. Man, there's some really good old episodes, and other things that are on there. We have some blog posts, and we also have some great swag, and encourage you to pick up some of that, maybe use it as a gift or a gag gift, or it's never too early to start planning for Christmas. Right. Bearded Theologians make for great white elephant gifts, and so think about that as you're preparing for your Christmas season. I know it's July, but it's never too early to plan.
If Hobby Lobby can have their Christmas stuff up, we can sell Christmas items.
Yes, I totally agree. So for the Bearded Theologians, I'm Matt Franks.
I'm Zach Bechtold. Thanks for checking us out.
We hope you've enjoyed the conversations that we've had today on the Bearded Theologians Beardcast, and we'd encourage you to continue those conversations online at beardedtheologians.com or on our Facebook page. We also hope that you pick up a couple of coffee mugs to satisfy your coffee mug collection. Have a good day.